True Crime Page podcast featuring Scott Williams Collins.
Hello and welcome to the True Crime Page podcast. I'm your host Scott Williams Collier. Today guys, we're back with a brand new show, a bit of a short one today. We're doing our first Q&A session. I've got 8 really good questions here, so we're going to do them. Also, don't forget to check out our blog. I've got a new blog out at the moment, the Mafia's Top 10 Rats in Mob History. That's had quite a good reaction, so go and check that out on the Facebook page. I've also got a written interview which I've done with ex-police officer and published author Chris Clark. Chris Clark's wrote quite a few really good books. In particular, he's wrote one on Robert Black, Britain's most notorious child murderer, and he's also wrote one on the Yorkshire Ripper, which is called Yorkshire Ripper: The Secret Murders. I'm also going to have Chris on as a guest at some point, and we're going to do a live recorded interview. I'm hoping we'll possibly do that in the next week or two. So go check those out. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're also on Instagram, the True Crime Page podcast. Right, I think we'll crack on with the questions. Question number 1. Do you believe that the Yorkshire Ripper murdered bookmaker Fred Craven? Absolutely, yes. I've spoken about this before. I did a show on the Yorkshire Ripper on my YouTube channel. Peter Sutcliffe knew Fred Craven's family. He went to school with his daughters. He actually at one point asked one of Fred Craven's daughters out on a date and did so on numerous occasions, and she rebuffed him all the time. She didn't like him. Fred Craven's wife also used to feed the children in the neighbourhood. They used to go to the Fred Craven's house and they used to all sit in the garden. She made them sandwiches. Peter Sutcliffe used to do that on a regular basis. He was said to have made bets with Fred as well. He used to go into his betting office and place bets with him. One of Fred Craven's daughters, Mrs. Vilder, Irene Vilder, she recalled Peter Sutcliffe used to walk behind her father sometimes and make fun of him. Now, Fred Craven was a real character in Bingley, and a lot of people liked him and knew him. He was very, very short in stature, and he had problems with his spine. I think this was something that was as a result of TB when he was born. So that's something that his daughter mentioned, that she remembered him making fun of her father, which she really didn't appreciate and found quite upsetting. Now, Fred Craven was brutally murdered in his office. He left his home in the morning and went to his office, and about half an hour later, his brother-in-law found him brutally murdered in his office, and some money had been stolen from the premises. Now, it would have been very, very easy for someone like Peter Sutcliffe to gain access to that property because he knew Fred. And he could have quite easily left the building after he committed the murder, around the back of the building, walked the short distance onto the canal pathway, down the canal, and then to his house, which was literally minutes away. And he could have done that without anybody really noticing him. And also, more importantly, in this murder is the way that Fred was murdered. Fred was brutally murdered. He was bludgeoned to death, which with an hammer. basically with a blunt instrument, which the police believe was a hammer. Now, a brutal murder in a place like Bingley, a small town in Bingley in the 1960s, was literally unheard of. Things never really happened like that back then. And for one so brutal, and to be done in the same manner that Peter Sutcliffe attacked a lot of his female victims, there's too much coincidence there for me. Now, interestingly as well in that case, Peter Sutcliffe's younger brother was actually questioned about that murder as well. It's not clear if Peter Sutcliffe himself was questioned, because unfortunately the police, when they were moving to a new police station a while back, lost all the case information on Fred's crime. It's still an open case and it's still being investigated, but unfortunately there's no details, no witness statements or anything, because it's all been lost. We'll probably never have any conclusion to that murder. I believe that I believe that Peter Sutcliffe killed Fred Craven. I don't think there was anybody in Bingley at that time who had the credentials to just walk into a shop and kill a disabled man, elderly man, in such a brutal fashion and just leave him for dead and walk off. The only type of person in Bingley in that time period who had those types of credentials was Peter Sutcliffe. So yeah, I definitely think that Peter Sutcliffe killed Fred Craven. Number 2. What do you think turns someone into a serial killer? It's an interesting question. Now, my personal opinion on that subject is that I believe it's a couple of things. I think it's part of its nature. I think there has to be something in a human being to be able to do something like that. But I think a lot of it, and the biggest part of it, is the environment that you grow up in. Now, when we look at the backgrounds of serial killers, many of them have grown up in abusive households. They've had parents that were abusive to them, a domineering, abusive father or mother. A lot of them have been bullied and picked on and made to feel like outcasts at school. Tragic events happening to them when they were young, growing up in poverty, those types of things. So I really do believe that people, more often than not, are a product of the environment that they grow up in. But with serial killers, I do believe there has to be something in that individual to be able to commit those kinds of crimes as well. I think the environment and the experiences you have really do shape you as a human being, and they will, they'll contribute to how you develop as an adult and how you treat other people. I think if you've had very bad role models in your younger life and you've been mistreated and you've been exposed to things that you shouldn't have been exposed to, I really do believe that can have a negative effect a lot of the time. But obviously most people who don't have great starts in life don't turn into serial killers, so I do believe that there has to be an extra ingredient in that person's psyche to be able to commit crimes like that. So for me, it's a lot of it is nurture, but there's also a little bit of nature in there as well. There has to be a combination of the right ingredients for somebody to grow up to be a really cold, callous killer like that. Question number 3. After the capture of the Golden State Killer using the perpetrator's DNA profile on the genealogy websites, do you think that the Zodiac Killer will be at last unmasked? Now, first of all, if you guys don't know who the Golden State Killer is, he basically terrorized parts of California for over a decade. He burglarized over 100 homes, he committed more than 50 rapes, and he murdered at least 13 people. And he was uncaught for about 40 years, but he recently got caught a couple of years ago because he left his DNA profile at the crime scenes, and obviously the police were smart enough to collect that. It's been put in a database. But what's the game changer now with solving unsolved old crimes like this is that the police are starting to use these genealogy websites to upload a perpetrator's DNA profile, and then they'll build a family tree. If you go, I've done it myself on Ancestry.com. If you do a DNA test and you put it on one of these sites, they'll tell you, where your ancestors are from, where you originate from, but they'll also link you to other people on there that you may be related to, fifth cousins, fourth, third cousins, grandparents. If your parents have done it, they'll match you to your parents as well. So that is an absolute game changer as far as I'm concerned. There has been some concern about how that information is handled and if relatives are going to have the names put in the paper and online. That's not the case. It's all done quietly in the background, and basically the police will build a profile on these sites and they'll find relatives and build a family tree, and then they'll start eliminating people until they find someone of interest. And that's what happened in the Golden State Killer case. I do believe that the Zodiac Killer will be caught. I really do. He may not be alive. He could possibly be dead. He could be in the prison system, or he could still be out there living a normal life. We don't know. He's probably in his 80s, I would imagine. Could be a little bit older. I'd say he's probably in his mid to late 80s, so there's a good chance he's still alive. The most important thing with the Zodiac case is that is the physical evidence. Now, as we all know, the Zodiac Killer sent numerous letters to the police department, with what I would assume that he has licked the envelopes and the stamps that are on those letters, because DNA was just pure science fiction back then. Nobody knew who it was, so knew what DNA was. So it's unlikely, I think, that a person would be intelligent enough to contemplate the possibility that they might be leaving some trace of themselves licking an envelope back then. I think they would have just licked the envelope and sent that into the police force. Tom Voigt and the Vallejo Police Department last year have sent off some stamps, I think a stamp and a letter from one of the original letters from the Zodiac, and it's been sent off to a company to see if they can obtain a full DNA profile. Now, we've not heard anything since then, and a year's passed by now, almost a year and a half. So I think that speaks volumes. I think that maybe they have got a profile and they're keeping it quiet, and they're searching for clues on the genealogy websites. And I'm really excited that this case may be finally solved, hopefully in the near future. Even if the perpetrator's dead, it'll be able to, give us some closure and give the families of the victims some closure, that they know who the person was who committed the crime. So I really do think there's a really good possibility that crime could finally be solved. Right. Number 4. What are your views on the death penalty? Would you like to see it brought back in the UK? Now, I really sit on the fence with this one, because I've always thought that killing someone is revenge. It's not justice. And I've always believed that if you commit a crime, you should have all your privileges taken away from you. You should be locked up 22, 23 hours a day. Your contact with the outside world should be virtually removed. And you should be left there to, think about what you've done and spend the rest of your life in prison. We've seen in the past innocent people have been executed. It's happened in this country. It's happened a lot in America. And I just think that maybe executing someone once you've caught them, I just think it does it show that we're just as brutal and ruthless as they are. You know, I'm not sure, but there's this other side of me that believes when I see these really terrible criminals that have hurt children, paedophiles and serial killers and people of that nature, and I think, yeah, well, you deserve to die. So I think if they brought the death penalty back to the UK, I would only like them to do so for the worst of the worst, and by that I mean serial killers and people that have committed terrible acts against vulnerable people like children, paedophiles. But yeah, that's my answer for that one anyway. Right, question number 5. Who is the worst serial killer in the UK and why? Peter Sutcliffe, without a doubt. And we've had some really notorious serial killers over the decades in this country. Obviously, probably one of the most famous serial killers, if not the most famous serial killer in the world, was Jack the Ripper in the late 1800s. You know, he murdered 5 people brutally. He potentially killed others as well, but there's 5 that they know he definitely killed. There's other serial killers, Fred West and people of that nature, but as far as we've also got like Peter Tobin, but the one that stands out above all of them for me is Peter Sutcliffe. He's serving life in prison at the moment for 13 murders and attacking 7 other women. But I truly believe there are dozens of other attacks that he's responsible for. And I believe he's murdered a lot more people than he's in prison for. I believe that the police authorities in Yorkshire don't want to keep investigating the case and dragging it up because they made a right mess of it back then in the 70s. They made lots of mistakes. Peter Sutcliffe was interviewed on 9 different occasions. He looked the spit of the photo fits that witnesses gave to the police. You know, if they'd have looked a bit further into Peter Sutcliffe's background and maybe seen the murder of Fred Craven, they may have been able to stop him sooner if they'd have made a connection to that crime. Yeah, without a doubt, Peter Sutcliffe's the most sadistic, prolific, and definitely the worst serial killer we've had in the UK. And I don't think we've heard the end of that case. There's still people investigating that case. Chris Clark, who I mentioned earlier, has wrote a book on the Yorkshire Ripper, and he highlighted 22 other murders that he believes that the Yorkshire Ripper committed. Peter Sutcliffe used to travel around a lot as well. He spent time living in London. He worked for a haulage company, so he's driving up and down all over the country. So I'm absolutely adamant that he's killed a lot more people than he's in prison than he's serving time for at the moment. And yeah, he's definitely the worst in my opinion. Right, question number 6. Is the mafia still around in America? And if so, what state is it currently in? Yeah, the La Cosa Nostra is still alive and well in America. They don't have the same power base that they had going back to the 80s, 70s, 60s, and going backwards to the golden era of the mob. They were really, really powerful back then. They had control of all kinds of things, but a lot of that got taken away from them in the commission trials. A lot of the big bosses got sent away for the rest of their lives, and it kind of decimated the mob. But they have rebuilt and they're still there. It's just that they do everything a lot quieter and a lot more low key nowadays. Everything's done in the shadows. They try and keep out the papers and off the TV. That's the way it should be. If you if you're running a criminal enterprise, the last thing you want to do is to be everybody knowing your business and knowing who you are. So everything's a lot more low key now. I think they do a lot of online crime, fraud, and things of that nature. But yeah, La Cosa Nostra, it's not what it used to be, but they are definitely still there. Question number 7. You mentioned some notorious crimes that happened in your hometown recently. Are you going to do a podcast show on them in the future? What I think this question is referring to, I shared a few articles that were about crimes that happened in my hometown of Leigh back in the 80s. And the quick answer to that is, yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing something on those in the near future. I'll just explain to you what they are. Basically, in 1984, a young girl called Lisa Hession, I think she was about 14, she was brutally murdered, literally a 2-minute walk from my house, just around the corner. She'd been dragged down an alleyway and raped and strangled and just left in an alleyway. The murderer has never been caught, and they're still investigating that case. I remember my mother being very concerned about me playing out at the time, and a lot of people were in that area at the time. 2 other murders that happened in my hometown of Leigh, where I was born and grew up, happened several years later. The first one was in 1988. A prostitute had been dumped in a field just outside Leigh in Loughton. She'd been posed, and she'd been horribly mutilated and stabbed. At the time, I really remember this because I remember my father talking to my stepmother about it, and I remember seeing it on the news. At the time, there was a TV drama that was on, that had just started on TV about Jack the Ripper. The police had the programme cancelled and taken off air because they believed that the programme had motivated the perpetrator to commit the crime. So that's why that really sticks in my mind. Now, the police were really concerned that this murderer was going to strike again, and I think about 4 years later, their worst concerns were realised when 2 young boys who were fishing on Pennington Flash in Leigh, they found a body of another prostitute that was chopped up and put into several bin bags. So that murder has never been caught either. They are absolutely brutal crimes committed by a very dangerous individual. I keep mentioning Chris Clark. Chris Clark is actually working on a book because Chris has dedicated a lot of his time since he's retired to investigating unsolved crimes. And he believes he's got a viable suspect for those crimes. Somebody who's already in prison serving time for killing 2 young girls. I won't go into that too much. We can discuss that with Chris when he comes on the show. So yeah, I'll definitely be covering those at some point. Obviously, it's something that's personal to me because it happened when I was a kid in the town where I grew up. Question number 8. Of all the serial killers, which truly had the least grip on reality, which was proven in the way that they killed? The one that jumps out to my mind would have to be Richard Chase. He was nicknamed the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Chase was really a deeply disturbed person. I think he had schizophrenia. He was a very odd, strange person. In his younger life, when he was sharing a dorm or an apartment with other students, they were always complaining about him walking around naked. He continued to do it, so they all left him in the property by himself. He had a fascination with blood. He believed that he had to drink blood to survive. He thought that his heart valves and his heart would explode or disappear if he didn't drink blood. So he started off by killing small animals, dissecting them. He'd put he'd squeeze the blood out of them and put it into cups and drink it. At one point, he was arrested by the police with a big bucket of blood. After they examined it and realised that it was Carl's blood, they let him go. And then he committed his crimes. He killed 6 people, and none of them were planned. People who are mentally ill, who go out killing people, people who are genuinely hearing voices and are just really not well at all, they don't plan the murders. They don't think about escaping or anything like that. They just go out and pick someone at random and do what they feel they have to do. And that's what Richard Chase did. He killed men, he killed women, he killed children. He committed necrophilia with a couple of the bodies and cannibalism. So he was a very disturbed guy. His last crime scene, he left fingerprints all over the place, and he left the scene as someone chased him off, and he was quickly apprehended not long after. When he was in prison, the other prisoners were that concerned and disturbed by him, they kept telling him that he should kill himself, and I think at some point he committed suicide. So yeah, that was Richard Chase was a deeply disturbed individual, and I would have to say to that question, he fits perfectly as an answer for that one. Right, that's all the questions today. It was a quick one. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, all I can ask, if you enjoyed the show or you like what I do, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. We're going to be back soon. I've got a few things in the works. I still want to do the Darren Appleyard story. We're going to have Chris Clark on for a live interview. Don't forget to check out my latest blog, The Mafia's Top 5 Rats in Mob History. Give that a share. Don't forget Sammy the Bull as well. Controversial figure Sammy the Bull is going to be on the Value Entertainment YouTube channel on Friday. I know that's going to upset a lot of people and make a lot of people angry, and rightly so. As far as I'm concerned, like I've said before, Sammy the Bull is very, very lucky that he's out walking on the streets. As far as I'm concerned, he should be locked up for the rest of his life, especially after murdering an innocent young teenager. I don't know how the authorities can let someone like that live a normal life. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. Give the channel a like. Check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. And that's it for now. I hope you have a good week ahead, guys. And I'll look forward to seeing you all again in the very near future.